Well, out of all the beautiful Christmas songs, I think my favorite has to be O Come, Emmanuel. It might even be just my favorite, not just Christmas song, but it may be just my favorite Christian song. And I'll tell you why. It was written some 1,200 years ago. Did y'all know it was that old? It was written 1,200 years ago in the 9th century, that's the 800s, by the way, by Christian monks in Latin. It may even be, you might check with Dan on this, he probably knows more hymnology than I do, but it may even be the oldest hymn in our hymn book. These monks sang it with a series of other songs leading up to Christmas. They had 7 songs called O Antiphons. And we've got a little graphic for you to see what the songs were. And they would sing the first one on December 18th, and then the next one on December 19th, and so on until they reached Christmas Eve, where they would sing finally, O come, Emmanuel. And when you take these songs and you look at the first letter of each of these songs, not the O part, but the next one, it spells, or it becomes a 2-word acrostic that means arrow, cross. Jeff, do you have the arrow cross graphic? See, if you reverse the order, Emmanuel, Rex, so on, arrow, cross, which means I will be present tomorrow. That's what the acronym arrow cross means. So they've taken these songs that lead up to Christmas, and then if you look at them in that order, it spells out, I will be present. Isn't that brilliant? How clever and creative. And so they would sing these songs leading up to Christmas and end on Christmas Eve with the idea that, hey, it's tomorrow. Tomorrow, Jesus is going to be here. Tomorrow, arrow, cross. Pretty amazing. I love it. I think it's so cool. These monks' relationship with the Lord moved them to do incredibly meaningful and creative things because they loved God so much. And then later, in the early 12th century, O come, Emmanuel was given the music and the melody that we sing today. So not only the lyrics, but even the melody is quite ancient. And as you sing it, it sounds, like even the melody sounds like a chant, like one of the old Gregorian chants. And the melody, I think, captures really the essence of the lyrics when you hear it sung. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. For some reason, that just the melody plus the lyrics, they just go so beautifully together. That's why I love the song. But that's not the only reason I love the song. There's a lot of depth to this song too about who Jesus is and what He's done for us and how we live in response to Emmanuel. When we sing this song about Jesus being God, we're singing something that is 1,200 years old. And today, over 1 billion Christians throughout our world still believe in its message and sing it during the Advent singing season. But this isn't even close to the best part of the song. So we're going to examine the song in light of Scripture. And let's pretend that this song is a huge hill. Let's look at the song like it's this big hill, and we're going to cut the hill vertically. We're going to cut it in half, and we're going to get a cross section and look at the layers of sediment that make up the song. Just like you would cut a hill in half, you see the layers of sediment? That's kind of like this song as well. There's a bunch of layers to it. And when you look at the sediment layers, it's like looking at a timeline. It's kind of like the song as well. O come, you come, Emmanuel has at least 8 historical layers to it. And here are the different layers of it. The first layer is in the year 728 BC, and it's represented by Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, which is a verse we're going to read in a little bit. But that's the first layer of the song, O come, Emmanuel. And the second layer is in the year 540 BC, represented by Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 5. Now, we're not going to have time to get to quite all of these different layers. So if you really want to explore and flesh out some of these layers, let me know, and I'll send you this slide or something, or take really good notes, and you can go home and do all the research on it. The third layer is 4 AD. 4 AD represented by Matthew 1:23. The fourth layer is AD 60, and AD 60 is roughly around the time when the book of Matthew was actually written. The fifth layer is AD 30 to 381, and that just kind of represents the early church as a whole and how they thought of all the different ways to explain that Jesus was Emmanuel and explain how it is that God is with us and explain the Trinity. The sixth layer is AD 850 when the monks wrote the lyrics. The seventh layer is AD 1100 when the melody was composed. And then the final layer, the eighth and final layer, is what the song does for us today. That's all the different layers of O Come, Emmanuel. And today I want us to look at just a few of them. Just briefly, look at a few of these layers. So let's begin with that first layer. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, where we read, Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we will call him Emmanuel. That's where that name, Emmanuel, comes from. The name, Emmanuel, does not occur anywhere else in the Old Testament. This is it. This is the only place. Now, it means that God is with us, and the idea that God is with us is present throughout many Old Testament verses. But the actual name, Emmanuel, is special to Isaiah chapter 7. So in the context of that passage, a virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Emmanuel. What's Isaiah talking about? It's a prophecy. What's Isaiah talking about? Well, in the context of Isaiah 7:14 is actually 2 Kings chapter 16. Again, y'all go home and y'all can read the whole chapter. It's an event called the Syro-Ephraimite War. So, after the Israelites will y'all indulge a little Israelite history this morning? After the Israelites finally make it into the promised land, it's not all smooth sailing, isn't? Recall your Bible study 101 from you were a child. They get into the promised land, and it's not all smooth sailing. They really struggle. In the book of Joshua, they're having to fight everybody. Man, they're just fighting everybody. And then in the book of Judges, nobody knows how to rule. There is no king. And so all the people just do whatever they want. And it's a lot of blood and guts and a lot of horrible things happen in the book of Judges. And finally, at the end of the book of Judges, the whole nation's going, for heaven's sakes, we need a king. We need some sort of government around here. And so finally, they get their first king. Their first king is Saul. And Saul does an okay job, but not a great job. And then they have David. Oh, and David is the pinnacle of Israelite history. And then after David, they have King Solomon, David's son. And after Solomon, everything just gets ruined after Solomon. Everything just gets ruined after Solomon. The nation splits into two nations. It's sad, really. It's sad. 3 kings aren't that impressive. That's it? 3 kings as a united nation and then separate? That's not very impressive. In fact, the kingdom of Israel spends more time as 2 separate nations than it does as one united nation. Isn't that interesting to think about? It doesn't seem that way in the text because a lot is put into those united years, but really there is more time, chronological time split than there is as a united nation. King Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was such a poor king and leader that he ran off 10 out of 12 tribes. In the north, the kingdom is called Israel, a.k.a. Ephraim. So that's the name of the northern kingdom. Israel, a.k.a. Ephraim. And in the south, it's called Judah. Israel and Judah, those are the 2 separate nations. You can remember that because I comes before J in the alphabet. I, J, Israel, Judah. Israel's also called Ephraim. And here's why it's important to know that. In the year 728 BC, so much, much, much later in Israelite history, the northern kingdom, Israel, also known as Ephraim, makes an alliance with another country called Syria. So Syria and Israel/Ephraim, they make a pact with one another, and together they attempt to take over the southern kingdom of Judah. And so they're waging war now, Syria and Israel together, against the southern kingdom, Judah. This is also known as the Syro-Ephraimite War. Now, do you see where the names come from? Syria and Israel. Syria and Israel together. Syro-Ephraimite War. And the king of Judah finds himself in a whole lot of trouble. The king of Judah is a man named Ahaz, and he finds himself caught between a rock and a hard place. If Ahaz fights against Syria and Israel, he will likely lose. He's not going to defeat two strong nations, but he has another option. But it's not really that great either. There is another nation that's quickly becoming the strongest nation in the world. It's called Assyria. And here's where they are. You can get a glimpse of Assyria. They're a little bit more further that way, and then they are coming into the promised land. If Ahaz doesn't want to join Syria and Israel, his other option is to phone a friend over in Assyria. But neither of these solutions are real answers to his problem. Fight and lose, or make a deal with the devil, the Assyrians. And just so you know, when you make a deal with the Assyrians, it's kind of like making a deal with Darth Vader. At any moment, Assyria could say, I am altering the deal. Pray I do not alter it further. When you buddy up to Assyria, they will soon have all the power. So neither of these options are really great options. Fight and lose, buddy up to evil. And this is where Isaiah chapter 7, this is the context within which Isaiah makes his prophecy in chapter 7. And it's where the song, O Come, Emmanuel, begins. This is the background story. This is layer number 1 of O Come, Emmanuel. Isaiah tells King Ahaz, I know it seems like you only have 2 options, but there's actually a third option. There's actually a third option, Ahaz. It's an option that maybe you have not considered yet. God is going to be with you. God has a solution for you. God is going to use Assyria to destroy Syria and Israel so that you don't have to worry about them at all. You don't have to go to war against them. God is already going to use Assyria to take care of your enemies. God is going to be with you. Just wait and watch. Don't buddy up to Assyria. Don't do that. And don't go to war. You watch and wait, because Emmanuel, God with you, is on your side. That's the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 7. However, Ahaz isn't convinced. And so Isaiah gives him this symbolic sign. Isaiah points to a young woman, and nobody really knows who the young woman is. It could have been King Ahaz's wife. It could have been a scullery maid who just happened to be, saucing through the room. It could have been just a random woman they saw out the window. Isaiah points to a young woman, and he says, see that woman over there? In just a few years, that woman is going to be old enough to get married and have a baby. And by the time the baby is able to eat regular food, by that time, the Assyrian army will have defeated those 2 nations who are conspiring against you. The child is a symbol of Emmanuel, that God will be with you in this situation. The sign of Emmanuel is a pledge from God that He has a solution that they didn't even know about, that they hadn't even considered. And you know what? You know why that's good news? Because often we too need an Emmanuel-sized solution when our options are limited. We too today often need an Emmanuel-sized solution when our options have become limited. You know, when I was in college, it was always difficult for me to come up with the money I needed to pay for each semester of school. I would always have an additional roughly $4,000 that was due every semester after the loans I had taken out and after whatever scholarships I'd received. There's always about $4,000 more dollars that I was due, and I always struggled to pay that and figure out ways to do it. I would do everything I could. I would work a side job, and my side job wouldn't cover for it. And I worked at UPS one year, doing like night shift at UPS, throwing boxes in trucks, and it was wild trying to work that and then get up and go to school and do well there, and then also working church jobs on the side. It was wild. But even then, I couldn't ever pay for my school, and every time I didn't know if I was going to be able to pay for it. Like every single time, I just started the semester and went, here we go, saddle up, here we go. I don't know how this is going to end. And there's one semester where they kicked me out of class because I hadn't finished paying for the semester yet, and they kicked me out of class, and it was embarrassing. And I just felt every semester like my options were so limited. There were several times, you can ask Amy, there were several times I thought, I'm not going to be able to finish school. Like I'm going to have to drop out and do something. I don't know what to do. I can't pay for that. And it was embarrassing. And you know what, though? Every single semester, though, somehow, every single semester, God provided for me in ways that I can't even explain. In different, unexpected ways, God would provide exactly what I needed from people I wouldn't call and try to get money from anywhere. Just all of a sudden, somebody would call me out of the blue, and they'd say, "Hey, we want to help you this semester. How much money do you need?" And I'm like, "Oh, wow, you called at just the right time," and they would help me. It was amazing that somehow, I don't know how we did it. Somehow, every semester, though, God stepped in, and He gave me an option that I didn't think was even possible. And I think that's just the way God works in the lives of His people. Like, that's just the way that God works for His people. Think about it. Think about your life. And think about all those moments of unexpected grace and blessing that you have received over your lifetime. I bet you can look backwards and figure out and look at places and say, wow, look at that. At just the right time, God did this for me. Oh my gosh, at just the right time, God did this for my family. Like, we can all pick out moments like that. That's because Emmanuel. That's because God is with us. If God is with us, that means that God has solutions, and He has options for you that have never crossed your mind. Isaiah told Ahaz, you don't have to make an alliance with the devil. You don't have to try to defeat anyone. I know it seems like you only have two options, but when God is with you, there is a third option. There is a third way. Something is going to work out. That's the message of layer number 1. So I know what you're thinking. What about Jesus? That's what we typically do with Isaiah. Like, we hear Isaiah 7 and whoop, we skip right on over to the New Testament. There's a little bit more there to it. And there is a lot about Jesus in it as well. If this passage is talking about how God showed up and rescued His people way back in the Syro-Ephraimite War, how does it also speak to the coming Messiah? Well, there is a New Testament layer. Jeff, can you pull the layer one back up for us? The layer graphic. There is, see that third layer, 4 AD, roughly the year Jesus was born, Matthew 1:23. Layer number 3 is Matthew 1:23, which is just a quote from Isaiah chapter 7. It says, "The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. That's all that Matthew does. Matthew just looks back, and he takes that passage, and he drags it all the way over, clicks and drags, and drops it, copy-paste, right into this first century world about Jesus. Matthew and the other early Christians, they took Isaiah 7:14 passage and they applied it to the birth of Jesus. They opened it up and they said, see, look. Do you see it? See this passage? It's Jesus. Do you see this passage about what God did back then? He's also doing it today again in Jesus. It's talking about Him. All the New Testament writers understood that yes, while the child in Isaiah chapter 7 was symbolic of Emmanuel, and it was about a situation then, it's also about Jesus now. That Jesus is the real, incarnate God with us. If that was just a symbol of God being with us, what must Jesus be? Actual. Not just a symbol, not just metaphor. Jesus is actual God with us. Jesus is the fullest expression of Isaiah chapter 7. But here's the best part about that. The best part about that is, well, do you remember how King Ahaz didn't have any good options? King Ahaz didn't really know what to do, caught between a rock and a hard place. Well, it was the same way in the first century world too. In that first century world, they were out of options. The problem was that they were looking for salvation from sin, salvation from themselves, and they couldn't find it anywhere. And they tried everything they knew to do as well, and there were no more options left. Salvation couldn't be found anywhere. Salvation couldn't be found in Greek philosophy. The best thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, they could teach you how to think really well about the world. But by the first century, they learned that all the best knowledge in the world wasn't going to save us. And they couldn't find salvation in the extensive Roman rule. The Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Things were never more peaceful in the Mediterranean world than when the Romans were in charge. That was a good time to be alive because they established peace, sometimes violently, but by golly, they did it. They established peace and order in the world. And everybody thought, well, surely this is the salvation we've been looking. And it turns out, no. Not even through Roman rule was salvation. Salvation wasn't found in the enlightened Greek culture. For the Jews, salvation wasn't even found in the law of Moses, as best as the Jews tried. As hard as they tried to fulfill the law that God gave the people on Mount Sinai, they couldn't do it. And they failed over and over and over again. And salvation wasn't found there. The poor were still oppressed. The most vulnerable were still neglected. The violence was still prevalent. Nothing was better. Abuse and slavery was still the status quo. And you know what? Not much has changed today. Not much has changed today. The problem of the first century world is still the problem of the 21st century world. The problem is that sin still exists and that it wreaks havoc on our lives. We have more advances in science, medicine, technology, and social justice than ever before, and yet we're missing something. Hundreds, thousands of people are missing something. They're still missing a Savior. And they're missing salvation. Humanity needs an Emmanuel-sized option. So Matthew 1:23 says that Emmanuel showed up with a solution that's never crossed our minds. Jesus himself showed up. God himself showed up with an option for the real problem of the world, and that option was grace. That's the option. God himself showed up with grace. God himself would come to us, become one of us, die for all of us. God becomes man. Who could have thought of that option? What, the most creative minds in the world, could they have come up with that? God would become a man to save us. Who would have thought of that? It's unthinkable. Emmanuel, God with us? Yes. It's exactly what it means. It's just the kind of thing that God is. It's just the kind of person that God is. Did any of you hear the story last January about the elementary school in the Dallas area that was in need of some dads? There was a school that was hosting a breakfast with dad. It was one of those, donuts for dads or something like that. And it was an event for the male students in the school to have a chance to just sit with their dad and get to visit with him and let their dad invest in them a little bit. But soon, the school realized that many of the students didn't have a father figure in their lives whatsoever. And they realized that very soon that many of these boys would be sitting alone at these tables for breakfast. And so they set out to see if there was anyone in the community that would come to be a stand-in father for these boys. Watch this video.
Look at all these men here. Isn't that amazing?
I did it because somebody did it for me. Right. Mentors definitely had a huge impact in my life.
Because I had so many men in my life when I was growing up that did for me what I'm hoping I can do for some of these kids.
Isn't that an amazing story? They had 0, they were looking for 50, and instead they got 600 men. 600 showed up to support those kids. Isn't that just how God works? And you know what? Like many of these boys, humanity is also orphaned. Orphaned by sin. Orphaned from the love and care of a heavenly Father. Unable to save ourselves, unable to do anything for ourselves, can't even tie a tie. And it was the unexpected solution of God who showed up to be our Father when we were fatherless that saves us. Jesus himself came to earth as a man, died for you on the cross, and paid for our salvation that you could not earn on your own. And it is now through him that we are able to live. That's what Emmanuel means to us. And so perhaps this morning you feel like you need a fresh option, that you need a God with you kind of option. Then the song, O come, Emmanuel, is for you. It's exactly that. And I suppose this is the last layer. And all those different layers, this is the last one. What the song does for us today, you can't fix things on your own. Without Jesus, you're out of options. The message of Christmas is that you need Emmanuel. Would you pray with me?